In this video, I'll be going over the extract, transform, and load process, or ETL for short. What we will be doing is we'll be preparing our data so that we can further analyze and prepare for visualization in Power BI. So, firstly, I have my source data here. This is an example of sales data from a model toy store. So they sell model kits for all sorts of vehicles, so motorcycles, classic cars, that sort of stuff. So what we want to do here is just have a skim through the source data just to make sure that the source data is consistent. So we're looking at data types here, making sure that they are consistent, and also making sure that there's going to be no issues with the data, so that once we do load this into Power BI, there'll be no issues, or prevent issues arising when loading into Power BI. So just going to have a quick skim through the data here. So what I am going to do is I'm just going to expand all of these columns. So I'm just going to highlight all of these columns and then just double click. Okay, so immediately off the back here, I can see one issue straight away, which is with this order date column. So for those of you who might not be able to spot this straight away, the reason why this stands out to me is the alignment of the actual values within the cell. You can see some are left-hand aligned and some are right-hand aligned. What that says to me is there's a difference in format here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to standardize this format, and I'm just going to put it into the date format here. Okay, so that's made things a little bit clearer, and we can see here that immediately there's some values that just haven't aligned to this right-hand column, this right-hand side of the column, which is what you'd expect to see in a date format. So these values here have, successfully been transformed into the date format, but these ones here that are left-hand aligned, these are not. So looking at this data, the main reason I can see here is that wherever from this data has come from, so I've just taken this sample data off of a Kaggle, off the website Kaggle. But for example, say this has come from a business, it might have come from their CRM or their sales platform. These values will not have been or are not stored correctly from that source, and that's what's causing this sort of error, or inconsistency is, I think, a better word here for this data. So how do we go about fixing this? So I just want to confirm if my suspicions are correct. So one thing about the date format is that all dates are stored sort of in the background as numbers in Excel. So these are what's called the serial number. So if I change this column to text, it should reveal the serial number. Perfect. So as you can see here, my kind of suspicion was correct. So that the ones that were right-hand aligned, that we said had gone into the date format as expected, they have now come left-hand aligned because we've set the format of the column to text, and we've just revealed this number essentially. So this is what's known as the serial number for dates. So if you don't know what the serial number is, every date has a number associated with it, and all it does is it just counts up the number of days from a starting point. So the starting point in Excel is basically the 1st of January 1900. So this date, for example, is 37,807 days since that starting point. So if we had took the starting point of the 1st of January 1900, that would have a serial number of 1, essentially. So I can see that these values here that are numbers are stored correctly. However, these ones that haven't changed, these are not stored correctly. So we're going to need to extract and convert those into a format so that we can get them to display this serial number and then, be treated as dates. So another thing that's standing out to me here is if we look at this value as an example. So for context, I'm based in the UK, and so my computer system is UK based. In the UK, our date system is day, month, year. However, when we look at this value here in this cell, we can see that that's not going to be a day, month, year, because it's got what I would read as the month as the 24th month. Now, obviously, that doesn't make sense. So this format here looks like it would be in the month, day, year format. So that's something we're also going to need to consider here when we look to work with this data. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, I'm not going to work with this data straight away in the source. I'm going to do all my workings in a separate sheet and then transfer that over to the source data. So I'm just going to copy this over. Okay. So my immediate thought is with these values here, I'm essentially going to have to break them apart into their constituent parts and then stitch them back together in the format that I would expect it to be in. So I am just going to clarify here whether I'll actually need to do that. So I'm just going to use the month function here and see if it returns the month. Now, I expect it shouldn't, because as you can see here in the function, it says serial number, but there is no serial number for this. So if I just copy that in, it comes up with a value. Whereas if I say drag that down to this one that has a serial number, you can see it's come up with 7 here. Okay. So I know that the usual date functions or functions that you would associate with dates aren't going to work here. So I am going to have to treat this as text and then stitch them back together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a type of spill function called text split. So if I just start typing that in, so you can see here we've got the text split function, and the little description says splits text into rows or columns using delimiters. So that's what I'm going to use. So here's my sort of breakdown of the formula, if you will. So the text I want to split is obviously in this column A here. The column delimiter, so this is where you want to split your text, essentially. What do you want to split it by? So I'm going to use the forward slashes here. So you can see in there we've got 2 instances of forward slashes. So that's where I want to split it, and then that will split it into its constituent parts. So row delimiter I can ignore because I don't want to split it into rows. I want to split it into columns, so I'm just going to leave that empty for the time being. Ignore empty. Now, if you did have empty cells, you could use this here. I don't have any empty cells in this data set, so again, this is another irrelevant argument in this function for me, but I'm just going to put true here. And match mode, again, because we normally work with text in this, or we always work with text with this function, normally this would be used as sort of like, alphabetical text. However, we don't have that here. We have numerical based text. So casing doesn't really matter. But if we were using alphabetical text, then casing would matter. So again, this is not relevant for what I'm going to do here, but just be aware of this if you are going to use it for, say, alphabetical based text. So I'm just going to put 0 here, it doesn't matter to me, and then pad width, again, I don't need to worry about this one. So I'm just going to close that off, and when I press enter here, you'll see that this is now split across 3 cells. So this is what we call a spill. So if I, for example, let's type something in here. So I'm just going to type example in here. You can see that the functions now return the hashtag spill error. So what that basically means is there's data in the way of where it wants to relay the data from the function. So although the function is technically only in this B2 cell here, it's relaying that information across 3 columns here, or 3 cells. So that's what a spill function is. Okay, so I've dragged this down, and you can see the kind of result here. So obviously these values here, where it wasn't in that sort of text-based date format, and it's just the serial number, they've not spilled across anything. So it has technically split the data, but obviously there's no forward slashes in these values, so it is just across 1 cell. Now what I need to do is I need to kind of stitch this back together in the order that I would expect it. So remember that in this column B here, we're expecting the month, and then column C is the day. However, before I do that, I just want to work with only those values which have just been split across the 3 cells. So I don't want to do anything with these. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply a filter here. And then on this column C, I'm going to filter out the blanks. And now we have just the values. So in order to stitch this back together, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the concat function, or you might know this as concatenate if you're familiar with other types of data manipulation, like Python, for example. This is called concatenate. So what concat does is exactly what I said earlier. It just kind of stitches text-based values together, however you deem to put them together. And you can see here it's got concat, text1, and then the ellipses basically meaning, and so on and so forth. So we need to stitch back together in the day, month, year format. So the first value to put in here is actually from column C. And then before you start putting in the other values. So if I just show you what would happen if we stitch it together with just the cells. So this would be the month and then the year. Oh, need the comma in there. You can see there's no forward slashes. So what we need to do is we actually need to add them manually ourselves. So I'm going to put some quotation marks here, the forward slash, then another quotation mark, and then just the comma. And then repeat that for the areas where we want the forward slashes to be. So it will look something like this. Now all I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag this down. So you can see this is worked fine here. Okay, so now we have this kind of like text-based string that looks kind of like what we want, although it's still not workable with. So now what we need to do is convert this into a date value. So we're going to use the date value function here. And as you can see, it converts a date in the form of text to a number that represents the date in Microsoft Excel date time code. So basically what we're doing is with these cells, we're creating a serial number. So close that off. As you can see, we've now got this sort of serial number appeared. So I could now just drag this down, but if I do that, it's because we've got a filter on here, it's actually going to apply it to all the cells that we filtered as well. So I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this and then drag down to all the cells here. And then at the top on my ribbon here, I do have a little button called Select Visible Cells, or you can use the Alt and the semicolon. So I'm going to click that, and all that will do is it will now, as it says on the tin essentially, select only the visible cells. Now if I copy my formula into the selection we've made here, it will only copy that formula into the visible cells that are selected. So the cells we can't see, i.e. the ones we filtered out, they won't have this formula in. So if I remove the formula, if I remove the filter quickly, you can see here that we don't have the values in there. Okay. So the last thing we want to do is we want to have a column now that has all of the serial numbers all in a row. So we need to get these values here from the ones that already had the serial number into this column. So again, the way we're going to do that is just by filtering. So instead of filtering out the blanks this time, we only want the blanks. So I'm just going to type this in the text box and filter it like this. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to say that it's equal to whatever the value is in column A. Again, I'm going to copy and drag this down and select only the visible. And again, I'm just going to copy it across. So you can see here these green ticks. What that means is, so if I click on it, you'll get the error message, and you can see on here. So it says the formula in this cell differs from the formulas in this area of the spreadsheet. So if I remove the filter, what that basically means is that whatever is in these columns here is different to what's up here, essentially. So now I have the column with all of the values in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight all of this, go back to my raw data, and I'm just going to paste these in as values. So it's really important here that we paste them as values and not just copy and paste, because if we copy and paste, it will copy across the formulas. So we don't want that. So I'm just going to paste as values. And now you can see all of these are now with the serial number that we would expect for a date format. So if I highlight the whole column again and we just select the short date format, you can see now that all of these are in the format that we expect. Now, because there was inconsistent formatting, what we need to do is check any values that relied on the value of this cell here. So that would be the month ID, the quarter ID, and the year ID. So for month ID and year ID, this is very, very simple. All we're going to do is use the, so for month ID, we're going to use the equals month function, and for year, we're going to use the equals year function. For quarter, unfortunately, there is no quarter function at the moment. Hopefully Excel or Microsoft, sorry, will add that soon. But there are ways around that, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later. So if we just add a couple of columns in here. So what we can do is just visually tell whether some of the values aren't correct. So here I'm just going to do equals and month, and then in the serial number we want to select is obviously just the order date column, and then in this second column we've inserted, we're just going to put the exact function. So what the exact function does is it checks whether two strings are exactly the same and just returns true or false. So obviously true if they are the same and false if they're not. So that's what we're going to do. So you can see here that in the month ID we've got 2, and then in this one we've got 2, so it's returned true. Now all we're going to do is just drag that down. So immediately you can see that we've got some falses, so we know that this data isn't consistent. For the purposes of what we were doing here, that's all I wanted to show, is that it is inconsistent. So what we can do now is just apply the month filter to the whole column. So I'm just going to delete these and just use the month function here to the whole column because we know that it's inconsistent. And I'm just going to copy this down. And voila. Now all the months should be correct. Now, the next thing that we actually want to do before we move on to the year column is we just want to paste these as values, because at the moment all these cells have formulas in, which we don't want. Remember, this is source data, so we don't want any formulas in the data. So I'm just going to copy this and then just paste it exactly where it is as values. And now you can see, if we look up into the formula bar here, that there are no formulas. It's just the number of the month. So we're going to do exactly the same for the year. So I'm not going to use the 2 columns this time. That was purely for demonstration purposes. So again, I'm going to put the year in and F2 again, and you can see it's returned 2003. I'm just going to put this down and copy as values in here. Okay. So for quarter, as I said earlier, it's not as easy because there isn't currently in Excel a quarter function. So what we're going to do is we're going to need to create a formula that is going to return what the quarter is. So there are a few ways we could do this. We could use like a very long, complicated sequential if statement, or alternatively, we could just use a little bit of maths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to opt for the easier maths option. So I'm just going to, in the quarter ID column, I'm going to use what's called the roundup function. And now where it says number, this is where we're going to put our little bit of maths. So we've got here number. So I'm going to put in there the month ID. So that's whatever the month is, divided by 3. Then close that off with a comma, and then just the number of digits, I'm just going to put 0. So what that says is that it's going to be an integer. And then close that off. And as you can see, it's returned the value 1 here. So if I explain this formula a little bit more, so the reason we're doing the month ID divided by 3 is obviously the quarter represents 3 months essentially. So 3 months in the year. So we know that quarter 1 is equal to January, February, and March, or in this instance is equal to the first month, the second month, and the third month, and then obviously so on for quarter 2, 3, and 4. So by using this roundup function, what we're doing here is we're saying 2 for the month ID here. So the month ID divided by 3. So in this example, 2 divided by 3 is going to be 0.666 recurring, right? And then the reason we use the roundup function is to round it up to the nearest integer number. If we just use the round, occasionally it might round down. So that's why we always want to round up. So what this formula will do is it will equate and it will say 0.666 rounded up to the nearest integer. Okay, that's 1. So if this said, let's change it for example's sake. So if this was 3, you can see it's still 1, but the second we go to 4, it now becomes 2. So we know that this formula works. I'm just going to put those values back to how they were, and I'm just going to expand this down across all the cells. So you can see we did have some of the values here changed, like I think this one changed. So before we move on, we can do a quick sanity check. So what we can do is we can filter we can filter on the month. So we know what months to expect in the quarter. So we can do 1, 2, and 3. And all we want in the quarter column is 1. So if we just look up here, we can see that there's only 1 in this column. And we can do the same for the rest of the month. So we can do 4, 5, and 6. And you can see there's only 2. That's as we expect. So for quarter 3, we would expect that to be months 7, 8, and 9. And again, there's only 3 in here. And quarter 4, we'd only expect months 10, 11, and 12. And as before, there is only quarter 4 or value 4 in this column. So we know that that's working absolutely fine. So I'm just going to remove the filter here. So we know that this formula works. So all I'm going to do now, as before, is paste this as values because we don't want any formulas in our source data. So just paste that in as values. And now we've fixed these values. So we've made the order date column a consistent format, and then from that we've corrected the values that relied on this value, which were the month, the year, and the quarter ID. Perfect. Now what we want to do is just have another quick double check over the data, make sure we can't spot any inconsistencies. So it all looks okay so far. Sorry, so if I just apply a filter on the top bar, all I'm looking at is that, so for year, for example, we only want numbers, and that makes sense. Product line, we've got these categories here. There's no blanks. There's no numbers, essentially. So that's kind of as we expect. Customer name. This is going to be specific to your kind of business needs. So there could be a variety of values in something like a customer name. So just be careful of that. Phone. This is, again, there could be a variety of values in this one. We would generally expect number, but if you can see, we are using multiple countries worth of data, essentially. So the phone will vary depending on where you're based in the world. So for this one, I wouldn't use this column necessarily. So I know that when we go into Power BI, I'm just going to remove this column. Same with address line. It's not relevant to anything that we want here. City we could technically use. So immediately I'm kind of drawn to this NYC. So abbreviations can be a bit tricky to work with. Not everyone knows the abbreviations. So I know NYC should stand for New York City. So I'm actually going to change this value later on in Power BI as well, because all I'm looking at right now is that the data is consistent, and this value is technically consistent with the other values in this column. But I'm just making a note that later on when we go clean this data, I know to change that value in the city column. State, not every value will have a value here, simply because, again, it's multinational, and so some countries use states, some don't. It can be a little bit complicated. It's not a consistent way to track your data on this one. So again, this one's kind of fairly unreliable, so I'm not really going to use this one. What I can do though is if I did want to use the state column, for example, I could filter by countries that I know have states. So for example, let's say USA here. And then just make sure that there are no blanks in this. So you can see here that there are no blanks in the USA, so that's good. And we can do vice versa. So we can actually remove the blanks from this column and see what countries there are. So we've got Australia, Canada, Japan, UK, and USA. So if we look at those countries and just see if everyone has a value in it. So for Australia, everyone has a value in it. Let's go, I think Canada was on there, so make sure that they all have states. Again, you can see this one's Quebec, but this one's BC. It's just a little bit inconsistent, but you can expand that out later in Power BI if you desperately wanted to. I think Japan was also on here, so let's look at Japan. Yep, and again, they all have values in. There's no blanks, which is good. And I think UK was the other one. Okay, so here you can see that we have blanks in here. So I know that we couldn't use the state for the UK, even though some of them do have, because it's got like Isle of Wight in here, for example. And it seems like only those values that have Isle of Wight are, but the others don't. So this just kind of confirms to me what I was saying earlier, is that this column is just unreliable, basically. So we're not going to use that later on. So again, I've made another kind of note that when we clean this data later in Power BI, I'm just going to remove this column. So postal code, again, pretty similar to state. This is going to vary a lot depending on, where you are. So we're just going to ignore that. It's probably going to be one that we're going to remove later on. Okay, country. Again, just make sure that there are no blanks. So there's no blanks in here. That's good. And territory. So this is going to be like the sort of region they belong to. Oh, okay. So this is interesting. We've got here APAC and we've got here Japan. So for the purposes of this company, they might actually split out the region. So technically, if we're going off of standard practice, Japan should be part of APAC. APAC just refers to the Asia and Pacific region, which Japan is a part of. You can Google that yourself if you wanted to double check and just make sure which countries are part of the APAC region. But you never know, this company might specifically extract Japan out of that for varying reasons. So what we want to do is just make sure that there are no values. If they do want to split Japan out of the APAC, it's just make sure that there's no values that are common between the two regions, because obviously that's going to cause issues. So if I select APAC and then look at the country, you can see we've got in here Australia and Singapore. So if I change this to Japan now, I know to expect no Australia or Singapore values. Well, I mean, I can immediately see that Singapore is included. So yeah, we've got Japan, Philippines, and Singapore. Okay, so we know that this needs tidying up because, we've got conflicting values here. So I think for simplicity's sake here, I'm just going to replace Japan with APAC because Japan should be in the APAC region. So that's what I'm going to do. So I could technically leave this as a step to do in Power BI if I wanted to, but because this is going to change the source data, I'm just going to have it, I'm just going to do this step now, essentially. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight the territory column and I'm going to do Control H. So what this does is it brings up the find and replace window. in here, I'm going to type Japan. So that's what I want to find. And I want to replace it with APAC. So actually, ignore me. Before I do this, I want to make sure that the step I'm going to apply is going to work how I expect it to. So what we need to do is actually identify how many values we're going to change. So if I filter by Japan here in this territory column, and just highlight all the values in this column. So you can see here in the bottom right corner under count, we've got 121. So when we do the find and replace, we should expect to see 121 values changed essentially. So let's do that step again. So highlight column V. It's remembered what we put in here before. And you can either do find all if you want to find all the options. I'm just going to do replace all because I can always undo it if it doesn't go correctly. So replaced all, and it says all done. We've made 121 replacements. Brilliant. That's what I was expecting. So I know that's gone how I expected it to. If you still are unsure, you can just click the filter for the territory and you can see Japan is not here anymore, and under APAC. So we know Philippines wasn't part of the APAC region before, but it is now. So was Japan. So we know that's worked as intended. Perfect. So contact last name and first name. Again, probably not going to do anything with this. They all look like text values, which is good. Yeah, so this looks fine. I'm not going to do anything with the values though. I will probably just remove those later on. And deal size, large, medium, and small. So, if this was a particular business, this column might actually mean something to the business. Obviously, I'm just using this as an example. So these values don't actually mean anything to me. So I'm just gonna leave this as irrelevant later on. Okay, so it looks like everything is okay. So we've standardized all the data, made sure there's no inconsistencies with the values, that sort of thing. So everything looks like it's now ready to do some further cleaning, but we're going to do that in Power BI. Okay, so here we are in Power BI. Now, the first thing we want to do is actually bring in all the data that we're going to be working with. So for this ETL process, there's actually 3 data sources that we're going to use. So you've already seen the first one, which was the sales data. And there are actually 2 others as well, which I'll show you in a little second here. So let's bring those in. So I do have here in my folder, you can see, so we've got 2 Excel workbooks. You can see that in the type column here. And then we've got a CSV file. So we know that there's 2 essential file formats that we need to bring in. So if we come up here in the Home tab of Power BI, and then we can go into this data section. So this is where you can select your sort of format of the data that you want to import. So you can see here, Excel workbook is actually here. I think because we've already worked with the sales data, let's do that one first, just so you can see it. So the sales data was in the CSV format. So what we're going to need to do is come to this get data and just click on that. So if you haven't used Power BI before, I would recommend just having a look at this get data tab. So you can see here there's a few common ones, common file formats or data formats that are included in this list. And you can see here text and CSV is what we want. However, if I just click on the More button here, you will see all of the formats that Microsoft Power BI can work with. And as you can see, there's quite a lot. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all of them. What I will just point out quickly is on these formats here where it says beta, just be aware of these format types, because if it says beta, that means that there's currently no support for that connection or that connector. That's what we call them. So they are connectors. So if you do select those connector types, just be aware that, you know, if there is an issue with that connector, there won't be any corresponding support documentation or other support types for that connector. So do bear that in mind when you're selecting, you know, whether this is the best method to include that. For the purposes of what we're doing today, that's not relevant for me. I can just, you know, use Excel workbook and text CSV. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to use the text CSV for the first file here. Okay, so I found the file here. You can see it's only got the text or CSV files selected. So this is my file, and I'm just going to open it. So once you've opened it, you can, it comes up with this sort of preview window. So you can expand this if you want to. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to click load here, just because I want this data already in Microsoft Power BI. We are going to work on it later, but I just want all the data in first. So I'm just going to click load here. And as you can see, it will load. And then you can tell it's loaded because on the right-hand side here, where data is, you've got here this sales data sample. On the left-hand side, where you click the table view, you can click on this and you can see the data in here as well. So let's bring in our other workbooks. So these are both Excel workbooks. I'm just going to bring those in. So the first one I'm going to bring in here is the product list. So when we do this, you get this little screen pop up here. So the difference between these two options on the left-hand side. So the first one at the top here, this is just the table. So in the Excel workbook, the data is stored in a table format, and this is good practice. So, you know, if you are importing data from an Excel workbook, I would recommend that you do include that that data in a table format. It makes your life a lot easier. However, you can use this one here, which is the sheet view. Just be aware that if you do have other stuff on that sheet, it will pick that up as well, and then you'll have to clean and remove that, etc. That can just make your life a bit more difficult. So good practice, do use tables. So I'm just going to select this products table here, and again, I'm just going to load it for the time being. And again, we're just going to select my next data source, and I'm going to select my next data source to load in. And again, we've got, you know, a table and a sheet here, so I'm just going to select the table this time and load that in as well. Okay, so I have my my data all loaded into Power BI, so I can start working with this and transforming, cleaning the data, just preparing it so that it's ready for further analysis and also creating visualizations. So in the Home tab still, we're going to click on Transform Data here. And this brings up the Power Query Editor. So the reason why I've kind of waited a little bit before we start doing this is, as you can see, all of our data is on the side here. So this is exactly what we want. Okay, so for ease of kind of view here of what I'm doing, I'm just going to remove this sort of statistics from the top here, and I'll explain what that is a little bit later because we are going to use that. So in order to do that, I'm just going to come into view and I'm going to get rid of column quality, column distribution, and column profile. Now, again, as I said, I will kind of go through those a little bit later just so you can see what they are, and it is part of the ETL step as well. Okay, so now we're just working with the pure data here. So on the left-hand side, let's select the sales data sample. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to right-click on it and just click Move to Group and New Group. So I'm going to create this group. I'm just going to call it Staging Area. And click OK. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag all of these other data sets into the group that we've called Staging Area. Okay. Now, the other thing that we're going to do here is actually right-click on them, and where it says Enable Load, we're just going to untick that. So you get this possible data loss warning that will pop up. It says Disabling Load will remove the table from the report, and any visuals that use its columns will be broken. That's fine. I've not made any visuals yet, so I'm just going to click Continue with that one. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the other data here. Sorry. Okay, so why have I done this? So when we're working in Power BI, we want to make sure that things are as efficient as possible. So by unloading the data here, when we do eventually work with the data and create visualizations, it's not going to load all of this data plus anything that we do later on, and it will become a lot clearer why we've done this now a little bit later on, but it is for just sort of optimizing performance for the time being. Let's use that as the reasoning. Okay, so if you remember in the sales data sample, when we were cleaning the data in Excel, we did specify that we were going to remove some of the columns because they weren't relevant, that sort of thing. Before we do that, let's just make sure that all the columns here are in the correct or expected format that we expect to be in. So if we look in the top left of the column here, you can see there's a little symbol. These are your data formats. So for order number, we've got this in whole number format. So you can see here the little symbol on the left-hand side. So that's fine. We can work with that one. Quantity ordered, again, is in the whole number format. That's fine. Specifically for quantity ordered, we'd expect that to be a whole number. You can't order 0.5 of an order. It doesn't work like that. All numbers should be whole numbers. So having that as whole number format is absolutely fine here. Price each, this is set to decimal number. Again, that's as expected. We working with pricing, so we would expect that to be in the decimal format. Order line number as whole number, again, that's fine, as expected. Sales, so this is the sale amount, again, in the decimal number format here, that's as expected. If we drag this across so you can see the rest of the data, order date, that is in the date format. That is absolutely fine for what we want to work with. If it did have times with it, you could put it in the date time format, but I could technically turn it into the date time format. So if I just show you what that looks like, you can see here it just adds on basically a time of midnight because there is no time data associated with these values. And then that step that I've just applied there to change it to the date time format has been included in the right hand side here in this box called applied steps. So I don't actually want it in the datetime format. That was just a sort of visual example of what would happen. So I'm just going to remove that by clicking this little X here. Now you can see it's back in the date format. Status, this is ABC, so this is text, that's fine. Quarter ID as a whole number, again, fine. Month ID, whole number, fine. Year ID, whole number, fine. Product line, so these are going to be sort of product categories. This is as text, that's absolutely fine. MSRP as a whole number here is fine. We're probably not going to use this, so we can remove that. Product code, we've got this as text here, that is fine. Customer name as text is also fine. Phone, now this is set as text at the moment because as you can see it's got like pluses in here and brackets and all sorts of stuff going on. So this is why when I was saying earlier about this is an unreliable format, this is why it's not reliable to work with, because the only way it can store this data is as text. If we try to store it as number, so if I show you whole number, add a new step, you get a load of errors. So let's just undo that. So as we said, we are going to remove this column. So what we can do is if we right click on the column header, you get the little drop down of steps you can do. We're just going to click remove. Okay, so address line 1, address line 2, these are text. City is text. Now remember, we did actually want to do a step here to replace these NYC and any other abbreviations into kind of like full names. So let's have a look and see if there are any other abbreviations. It doesn't look like it. It's just the NYC here. Okay, perfect. In the Home tab, if we come across here to this Transform, we've got a little button here called Replace Values. So if I click on that, it is essentially the find and replace from Excel. It's just in Power BI. So the value to find here is going to be NYC. And I'm just going to replace this with New York City. You do have some advanced options, but for what we're doing here, they're not relevant right now. So I'm just going to click OK. As you can see, it has added the replaced value step on the side. So the way we can check, so we can see here that this NYC has changed. But the way we can check it's worked is if we just type in NYC in the filter, you can see there's no results. Whereas if we type in New York City, you can see there are results here. So I know this has worked for what we're doing, so that's absolutely fine. Okay, the state here is as text, that's fine. Postal code, this is as text. Again, this is a very inconsistent and unreliable data type to work with because it varies depending on what country you're in. So because of that reasoning, we are just going to remove this. So I'm just going to remove postal code. Country. Now, obviously I have looked at this data before, so I know this already. However, what we're going to do later on is we're actually going to link the country to some sort of population data, which is what we've got here in this table. Now, in order to do that, we need to make sure that what is displayed in this country table matches what is in the other table in the list of countries. They have to be exactly identical in their values. So I already know, but the values USA and also UK, if we go into our list of countries here and just type these in, so USA, it doesn't appear because it's not in this table. And same for UK. You can see we've got UK here, but they're in brackets. They're not actually the United Kingdom. So what we want to do is find out how the USA is, displayed in this list. So if we type in United, you can see here we've got United States. So this is how this should be displayed in our sales data. And the same for United Kingdom here. We need to do another find and replace step, replacing, if we go over to the column, replacing USA with United States and UK with United Kingdom. So that's what we're going to do. So same as before, just going to do highlight the whole column, replace values, which again is in the Home tab under Transform. So the first one we're going to do is just USA, and I'm going to replace that with United States. Make sure that's all spelled correctly, and then press OK. Again, let's do a quick check just to make sure that's done right. So USA is not there, but United States is there, so that's perfectly fine. Okay, and then keep the column highlighted. The next one we're going to do is just UK, and I'm going to replace that with United Kingdom. Press OK. And again, if we just type in here UK, you can see there's no results. If we type in United Kingdom, you can see it's up here now. So this is fine. So when we come to match this data table with the other list of countries data table, it should work. Now again, we can check that when we're actually doing that step, but we've just kind of got a little bit ahead of the game here because I know that these were inconsistent between the two tables. We do need to make them consistent between the tables for the actual join to work. Okay, so this column's formatted as text, that's fine. Territory, this is formatted as text, that's fine. So I am actually going to rename this column. So before I do that, there's two ways you can do this. So you can either right click the column header and click rename, or if you're like me and you don't want to do that because it's a little bit long-winded, you can just double click the column header and it gives you the option to rename it. So I'm just going to rename this to region. Honestly, no specific reason why. It really doesn't have any impact on our data and our steps. It's more for my benefit in terms of, if I work with this data, I'm a little bit more familiar with the term region. I know exactly what that means, as opposed to territory. In my head, that could mean several different things depending on the context. So for me, I'm just going to call it region. It just makes my life a little bit easier, So I can immediately read region. Oh, okay, that's this column. Okay, so now we come here to contact last name, contact first name, and deal size. So we are going to get rid of this contact last and first, and we're also going to get rid of the address line columns. So let's do that. So we can actually do this all in one. So we're going to select the address line column. Now, if we hold down the Control key and then click on the other columns, so contact last name and first name, and then if we right click and remove columns, you can see it's now removed all of those columns at the same time. If you want to double check that, what you can do is in the step, if we come up here to the formula bar, you've got in here the step that it's just applied. So it's got table.removed columns, and then the name of the columns it's removed. So it's got address line 1, address line 2, contact last, and contact first. So we know that that has removed those 4 columns there. Okay. So is there any other data in here that we want to get rid of? Just removing any irrelevant data here. We can remove the MSRP because I don't think I'm going to use that. So I'm just going to remove that one as well. And you can see it's added it as a step in this formula bar up here. I think everything else in this data set looks okay. So everything else we can probably do something with when we come to the visualization or the analysis. So in the applied steps here, what you can also do is rename the steps. So like here, for example, it says remove columns, but looking at it, I don't know what we remove. So I can just say, if we right click on it and just click rename, you can say remove column, and we can say phone, for example. And again here, where we've got this removed columns 1, we can say, okay, we removed column postal code. And we can do the same for these ones here. So let's, so where it's got renamed columns, we can say rename columns territory to region. Let's drag this out a little bit so you can just see what we're doing as well. And then the same for remove columns 2. We can say remove columns, rename this one, and we can say, you know, address line 1, address line 2, contact last name, I can't type, contact first name. You get the idea. I'm not gonna type out all of that. It's just kind of like you know, the amount of steps we've applied in this little step here is quite a lot, so it wouldn't really make sense here. So we're just gonna do remove columns, and then, you know, they can read the former bar if they want to. And we can do the same for replaced value. So I'm just going to say in here, we can say replace value NYC with New York City. So this is good practice because obviously, you know, say for example, you're collaborating with other data analysts in your team and they want to know what steps you've applied. This just gives them a little bit of information at a glance, but also for your own benefit, you know, so you might do these steps and then have to come look at it next month to see what you did and you've kind of forgotten what you've done. You know, again, this gives you an idea of like what you did at a glance. And then, you know, if you need further information, you can just, you know, click into the steps and just read up in the formula bar exactly what you've done. So again, just going to rename this to USA to United States. And lastly, we'll do this one, UK to United Kingdom. Perfect. And that should be enough for now. Okay, so now people, you know, when they read these steps, they have a rough idea of what happened. Okay, so I think I'm quite happy with this data as it is at the moment. So let's look at the other data sources, because we do need to make sure that they are in consistent format as well. So here we've got product code. So because later on we want to, you know, create joins and join these data together so we get a little bit more information, we do need to make sure, so any columns that are common, so here we've got product code. For the join, we need to make sure that they have consistent data type, and consistent name. So we're going to match the products later with product code. So in the sales data information, you should see a column called product code here, and it's in the text format. So that's what, so in this products table, that column should match that identically. So it is in the text format and it is called product code. That's no issue. Then we've got product name. This can be in text. That's absolutely fine. And we've got product line here, which is in text. That's okay. So this one I'm quite happy with. Nice and easy, that one. It's not a very complicated piece of data, so it's only 3 columns, so that one's nice and easy. List of countries. So here we've got a few more pieces of information. So for the purposes of what we're doing here, columns 3, 4, and 5 are not going to be relevant because all we need really is just the name of the country and the population. So what we can do, if we did want to, is remove these columns. Again, you know, if you are having problems with performance, this could be something that you could consider doing to kind of just, you know, squeeze that little 0.1% of performance out. I'm not going to do that here. It won't matter too much for what we're doing here. So I'm just going to check that these are essentially in the correct format. So location is in text format, and that is fine. Population is in whole number, again, that is fine. Percent of world. So we can technically change this to a percentage if we wanted to. So if we do that, I'm just going to add a new step just in case it doesn't do what I want it to do. Okay, cool, that's fine. So this is absolutely fine, no problems with that one. So I'm just going to keep that one as the percent. Date, again, that is all good. And source as text is absolutely fine. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do here before we look at joining these sort of tables together to create one larger data set that we are going to work with is we want to just make sure that the data quality is good. So as you saw at the beginning, we did have this column quality, column distribution, and column profile open. So I'll go through these one by one and I'll show you why these could be useful too. So the first one I'm going to look at here is column quality. So if I just tick that box, you get this little section between the header and the first value of the column pop up. So what this is looking at is it looks per column how many errors or how many blanks there are in the column, essentially. What the valid means is just, you know, is the value in the column agreeing with the format that we've set for this column. So for example, in the order number here, we've got as whole number. So does the value 10107 agree with that data format? Well, it does. So it counts as a valid value, essentially. So what we can do here is look for any columns that have errors in, for example. So, you know, if we do a step, it might not be immediately obvious that some of the values have returned an error, particularly if there's only maybe 1 or 2 of those values in a data set that's, you know, thousands of rows long. So this is a really good way of identifying those. So you can see here, error is 0 across these. So we're just going to go across. So we've got no error values popping up, which is good. Now, the other thing that we can check is empty values. So there are instances where you don't want any empty values in a column. So for example, product code is a brilliant example of where you don't want any empty values, because particularly for this column here, we're actually going to use this column to create a join to the other tables. So this has to have values in it. So we don't want any empty values in here. So that is good. So you can see if we go back to the beginning here, you can see there's no empty values looking at the top here in any of these columns, apart from when we get to the end here in the state. Now, we've already spoke about this one a little bit, so that's fine. The only reason I'm keeping this column here is because in the examples of like US and Australia, there weren't actually any empty values for those particular countries. And those are the only countries really where looking at the data at a state level would make sense. You know, for France, it's not going to make sense. And, you know, all the values are empty. So, you know, if I change the filter here, for example, and we select France, you can see now that these values have changed. So it's 100% empty. So I'm just going to undo that step. So that's the reason I'm keeping this column, is that, you know, we do want to do a little bit of analysis on the United States in particular. We can do that, and just keeping that state information there, it just provides further analysis we can do. But I am aware that we are somewhat limited in what analysis we can do because there are empty values here. But having empty values in this column is okay. All the others don't have any empty values in, so that's all good. Okay, so let me just remove the column quality and let's look at column distribution. So, what column distribution does is it will tell you how many distinct and unique values there are in your column. So what a distinct value is in the data, obviously you can have multiple values. Distinct values will tell you how many or just how many values appear in that list of in that column, ignoring duplicates. So say, for example, this 10201 appeared 3 times. Well, that would count as one distinct value. So in this column order number, there are 266 distinct values and 38 unique. So unique is slightly different to distinct. In that unique values also count how many values there are that only appear once in your column. So I know in here that there are 38 values that only appear in here one time. If we look at price each, for example, you know, there's 213 unique values and 273 distinct. So depending on your data type, that can actually be quite useful to know. So things like quarter, for example, or month, having unique values here could actually be very interesting, because, you know, if we had one unique, that means that one of the months in this data only appears once. So having 12 distinct values in a month ID actually makes sense because, you know, there's only 12 months. So this column distribution can provide useful insights depending on the type of data you have. Looking at a glance here, it doesn't really do too much for me. However, if we just uncheck that and look at column profile, here you get a little bit more information. So here you actually have to physically select the column. It's not going to display it. It's not going to display it under each column. So if I click on order number, for example, at the bottom here, we've got a few sort of statistics that have popped up. So count shows you how many, values are in this column. Just be aware that, it can sometimes be limited. So, just be aware of the count value. But I know that in this data set, there are 1,000 values in this particular column. Again, that's something to stress. So if we go to a column where we know that there are empties, you can see 1,000 count, but empty 507. So going back to order number, we can see here that there are 0 error values and 0 empty, 266 distinct and 38 unique. There's 0 NaN, so that stands for not a number, 0 zeros. The min value is 10100. So for us, for this column in particular, that's not really that relevant. However, if we look at something like a price, knowing what the min and the max is quite useful for identifying outliers. So, perhaps we know that the maximum price of all our products in this data set is 100. So if we see like a value in here that says 10,000, we know that's going to be an anomalous value and probably needs looking into or getting rid of. So this is all fine. It gives you also the average, so what the average of the values are. So we can see here the average is 90.2288. So it's on the top end of this range, and the standard deviation as well, if you wanted to know that. So that just tells you how far away the values are from the mean or the average value. So this gives you a lot of statistics about your data. Now this is these sort of tools are really good at helping you identify, the credibility, the reliability of your data. Because this is quite a simple example, everything looks really nice and good, which is cool. But if you do have more complex data, these column quality, distribution, and column profile options can be really good to look at. Obviously, as well, some of you may have spotted this already, but if you haven't, column quality and column distribution are actually displayed in the column profile. But if you don't want all this extra information, you can just split it up by column quality or distribution if you want. You can also tick both. So if I tick both, you'll see here that the column distribution is displayed at the bottom of these charts here. Cool. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to try and look to do our merge. So what we want to do is we're going to merge this sales data sample with our other tables here. So if we go up here to merge queries, and we want to merge query as new. So if we just ticked merge queries, it would merge the data depending on what we've specified, but overwrite this query. So it would be the same query. So it have all these steps and the merge as well. We don't want to do that. We want to keep this kind of like source data in Power BI in case we need to use it again or use it for something else. But have our merge query as a new query. So that's what I'm going to do here, is merge query as new. So I'm going to click on this. So here we get the merge query pop-up come up. So here you have to select which of the tables you want to merge. So for the top one, if you know anything about joins, the top one will be your left table and the bottom one will be your right table. Let's merge the products table first. So what we want to do is merge, because in our sales data, we don't actually have the product name. We only have the code and the product line. So let's get these names in here. So what we need to do is merge on the product code column here. So all we do is just select the column that we're going to match with. Okay. In terms of the join kind, if we look at this, these are your options here. So we are going to do a left outer join. So if you don't know too much about joins, I'm not going to cover them all in this video. So I would recommend just, doing a little bit of research about this. But for this left outer join, all it will do is it will keep all the data in your left table. So that's the top one here. And just the matching from the second or your right table. So that's why I identified the top and the bottom as left and right. So we're going to do a left outer join. As I said, do have a read about the types of joins, because it's good to know, and it will help you understand this section a little bit better. So I'm going to do left outer join here, and as you can see, we've got a pop-up here. So the selection matches 2,823 of 2,883 rows for the first table. So we know that there are no rows that aren't going to match. So I'm just going to click OK here. So here's my new query. So I'm just going to call this, something that I'm going to know to associate with. So I'm just going to call this sales plus product. So now I know that I've merged the sales and the products table. And then if we come to the end here, we get this little column here. So this is technically just a representation of the products table. If we click this icon in the top right here, we now can expand this table and select the data that we want to see. So here we're going to select the columns that we want to see. So I want to see the product name column. I don't need the product line because, again, that's already in here, and I don't need the product code because that's what we've matched by, so it's already in here. So all I want is the product name. So I'm going to click OK. And as you can see, now the product name is displayed in the dataset. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to rename this column, because as you can see, it's called products.product name. I'm just going to rename it product name, keeping it all capitalized to keep it consistent with the other columns. Okay, so now we have the actual product names, or the names of the products, in the actual data itself. Awesome. So what we're going to do now is we're now going to do another merge, but with this new query that we have. And we're going to do a merge with the list of countries. So same thing again, we're going to do merge queries as new, sales and products as your left table, and we're just going to do list of countries as our right table. Here what we're going to do is we're going to match the country with the location. So this is why we changed the name of USA and UK in our sales data earlier to United States and the UK, because if we didn't, it wouldn't match those values. So again, we've got matches 2,823 with 2,823, so we know it's found all of them. Just going to click OK. And as before, we're just going to expand this. So here we do have, a few more options. I'm just going to include the population table, the population column, sorry. I don't actually need any of the other information. And we're just going to rename it. So I'm going to get rid of everything before and including the full stop. So it's just called population. And you know what? Let's actually capitalize all of that as well. So it's, in the same format as the other columns. Doesn't have to be, just, looks nicer. Okay, and as you can see, all the population data is included now in this column, which is great. Because now what this enables us to do is look at, our sales and maybe compare to, the population of the country and see, a relativistic, well, Japan has a lower population, but we're doing more sales in Japan compared to, the US, that sort of stuff. It just enables us to do bigger and better insights and further insights, more in depth. Again, I'm just going to rename this merge here. So I'm going to call this sales plus products plus population. You can call it much better things than me if you wanted to. What I'm also going to do is I'm just going to drag this query out of the staging area as well. So we can drag it into other queries if we want. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to check whether the sales and products query that we made earlier is going to load to Power BI. So I'm going to right click as before, and I'm just going to uncheck enable load. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same for the sales plus products plus population table. And this one is checked. I'm just going to keep it like that because this is the table that we're going to work with to do our calculations, our analysis, our visualizations, all that sort of stuff. So now that we have our final table here, let's just do another double check just to make sure everything's okay. For your own sanity, everything should be fine because obviously we did all the cleaning steps up here in these queries here. So as you can see, it's got the cleaning steps in the actual queries itself. So in this live query that we have here, there are actually no sort of steps apart from the column we renamed. Okay, I'm quite happy with this data now. So all we're going to do now is, we've extracted the data from the sources, we've transformed it into the formats and the values that we want to make sure that they're consistent with each other, that enabled us to do merges and joins. Now we have this final data set here that we're now ready to load into Power BI. So this is the reason why we called this group here the staging area, because this group is just a group of tables that we've done all our extract and transform steps on. And we've just left with this last table that we're going to load. So if we close and apply this here, if we look on the right hand side, you'll see there is now only one table here, and that's that last table that we worked with. This is exactly what we wanted. We're not overwhelmed with data or tables now. We only have the one table that we can now work with. If we had loaded all of the tables as before, you would have seen that we would have had 3 tables here, and we would have had to have come into this data model section and create a data model if we wanted to. It's just a lot of extra work. Whereas here we now have a very simple and only one table that we just need to work with. Now from here, when we move on to the analysis section, we can look at creating measures and doing all of that jazz with the visualization. And that's something I'll cover in the next video. So this is now the ETL kind of process over for this project. So just to summarize, we just extracted the data from our Excel workbooks and our CSV file. Just remember that we did 1 or 2 cleaning steps with the source data in the actual CSV file itself, just so it was ready to be extracted. Then once we extracted the data, we transformed, did some further cleaning and manipulated the data so that it was ready and easily accessible to create joins with our tables to create one large data set that we're now going to work with, and it's now ready for analysis and further visualization. I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it useful. If you do have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I'll also, in the description below, I'll include any links to other videos that were related to this one. So for example, the population data that we brought in, I did do a video on where we actually got that data from using Power Query in Excel to scrape the web for that data. So if you do want to know how we did that, go look at that video. It will be in the description below. Apart from that, take care, and I'll see you all in the next video.